For 20 years, Margaret Collins gave away pieces of her life so quietly that the people she loved the most never even realized it was happening. Every morning in the small town of Ashford, Ohio, long before the sky began to lighten over the quiet rows of maple trees, Margaret's alarm clock rang at 5 o'clock sharp. The sound was gentle but firm, and Margaret never pressed the snooze button. She slipped out of bed quietly so she would not wake David, her husband, who had worked late driving freight across 3 states the night before. The house was silent except for the soft hum of the refrigerator downstairs. Margaret pulled on a light gray sweater and walked down the hallway toward the kitchen, her steps careful and familiar after 2 decades of the same routine. The kitchen window faced east, and on clear mornings the first hint of sunrise would appear as a pale blue line above the rooftops across Maple Street. Margaret always liked that moment because it felt peaceful before the rest of the day began moving quickly, and placed slices of bread into the toaster. By the time the coffee finished brewing, she already had 3 plates ready on the table. David liked scrambled eggs with pepper. Lucas preferred toast with peanut butter. Emma liked her eggs sunny side up with a small glass of orange juice. Margaret rarely thought about her own breakfast because she usually ate something small later during her shift at the grocery store. The kitchen clock ticked quietly while the food warmed on the plates. At 5:45, David walked in, stretching his shoulders after a long night on the highway. He nodded toward Margaret with a tired smile and poured himself a cup of coffee. "Morning," he said in the same calm voice he used every day. Margaret smiled gently and wished him a good morning as well. A few minutes later, Lucas appeared with headphones around his neck and a backpack slung over one shoulder. He was 22 now and finishing his final semester at Ohio State University, but he still stayed at home to save money while commuting to campus about 20 miles away. Emma followed shortly after, scrolled through messages on her phone. The family sat together for breakfast most mornings, though the conversation usually moved quickly between schedules and errands. David talked about his next driving route. Lucas mentioned a project deadline, and Emma described an art assignment she had been working on. Margaret listened carefully to each of them, while occasionally refilling a coffee cup or placing another piece of toast onto a plate. When breakfast ended, everyone moved quickly toward the front door to begin their day. David left first, climbing into the large blue truck that waited in the driveway. Lucas followed soon after, starting the engine of his small silver sedan before driving toward the highway. Emma grabbed her backpack and hurried down the sidewalk toward the school bus stop at the corner. Within 15 minutes, the house was quiet again. Margaret stood alone in the kitchen for a moment while sunlight slowly spread across the wooden floor. She rinsed the dishes, wiped the table, and folded the kitchen towels neatly before heading upstairs to Preferred Market, a grocery store about 10 minutes away. The job did not pay much, but it helped cover everyday expenses and allowed her to keep a flexible schedule for the family. Most mornings she arrived before 7:30, tying on her green store apron while greeting the same group of coworkers she had known for years. Margaret worked at the front registers and often helped elderly customers carry bags to their cars in the parking lot. People in town recognized her friendly smile and calm voice. Some of them stopped to talk about the weather or ask about her children because Margaret had lived in Ashford for so long that many families felt like neighbors. But very few people asked Margaret about her own life or dreams. Not because they did not care, but because Margaret had never made her personal wishes the center of attention. She simply helped where she was needed and continued moving through her routine with quiet patience. 20 years earlier, Margaret Collins had once imagined a very different future. When she was 19, she studied nursing at a community, helping people recover from illness and bringing comfort to families during difficult moments. Her instructors often praised her attention to detail and the natural empathy she showed during training sessions. Margaret believed she would one day work in a hospital ward where her steady hands and calm voice could make a difference. But life does not always move according to early plans. During Margaret's second year of college, her mother became seriously ill and required daily care at home. Margaret made a simple decision that felt obvious at the time. She left school temporarily to help her family, telling herself she would return once things improved. Months turned into years. Her mother's health never fully recovered, and Margaret's responsibilities at home slowly increased. During that period, she met David Collins, a young truck driver who often delivered shipments to a warehouse near her neighborhood. David was kind and hardworking, and he admired Margaret's patience with her family. They married 2 years later, and soon after Lucas was born, Margaret's nursing textbooks had been packed into a box in the attic. She told herself that raising 2 children was just as meaningful as any career she might have pursued. And in many ways she believed that completely. She loved watching Lucas learn to ride a bicycle on the sidewalk in front of their house. She loved helping Emma mix bright colors during her first school art projects. Those moments filled Margaret with quiet pride. Still, every once in a while when she passed the local medical clinic or saw a nurse walking confidently through a hospital hallway on television, a small memory flickered through her mind. She never spoke about it because life was already full of responsibilities. Over time, the thought simply became another quiet corner of her past. Years moved forward quickly. Lucas grew into a thoughtful young man who studied engineering. Emma discovered a passion for painting and dreamed of attending an art school after graduation. David worked long hours on the road to support the family, often driving hundreds of miles across Ohio. All of those changes, Margaret remained the steady center of the household. She balanced the grocery budget carefully so Lucas could afford textbooks and Emma could take private art classes. She repaired old furniture instead of buying new pieces. She chose modest clothing for herself while making sure the children always had what they needed. When the family car needed repairs, Margaret quietly used savings she had built from years of small sacrifices. No one ever asked how she managed those details so consistently. They simply trusted that Margaret would take care of things the way she always had. One evening during early autumn, the Collins family gathered for dinner at the same wooden table where thousands of meals had been shared over the years. The smell of roasted chicken filled the kitchen while warm light from the ceiling lamp reflected across the polished surface of the table. Lucas talked about a job interview he hoped to secure after graduation. Emma described an upcoming art competition at her school. David mentioned that he might need to drive a longer route. Margaret listened carefully to each story while serving vegetables onto their plates. The conversation felt ordinary and comfortable, just like every other dinner they had shared. But something subtle happened that evening. Emma paused for a moment and looked directly at her mother. She noticed the faint lines around Margaret's eyes and the gentle tiredness in her posture after a long day at the grocery store. Emma realized she knew many details about her mother's daily routine, but very little about the life Margaret had once imagined for herself. The thought lingered quietly in Emma's mind as dinner continued. Later that night, Margaret washed the dishes while the rest of the family relaxed in the living room. The window above the sink reflected the soft glow of streetlights outside, while cool autumn air drifted through a small opening near the frame. Margaret dried her hands with a towel and glanced briefly toward the attic staircase at the end of the hallway. Inside the attic, tucked inside an old cardboard box, were the nursing textbooks. Not feel bitterness about the choices she had made. She believed deeply in the value of caring for the people she loved. Yet even the strongest quiet sacrifices sometimes remain unseen for so long that they begin to fade into the background of everyday life. And as the night settled gently over Maple Street, none of the people sitting comfortably in the living room fully realized how much of Margaret's life had been given to make their own paths easier. If stories like this remind you that small acts of dedication often shape the lives around us more than we realize, you can continue discovering meaningful stories about family, resilience, and the quiet strength of everyday people by subscribing to this channel and sharing these moments with others who believe that